Pastor Paul, of course, addressed anxiety on Sunday as we continued our series, Biblical Prescriptions for Common Ailments. And there was a verse that came across my path today that I thought I'd share with you just briefly that, interesting, I had never considered it, addresses that subject. Speak before on Romans chapter 15 and mention specifically verse 4. For everything that was written in former times was written for our instruction. So that through endurance and through encouragement of the scriptures we may have hope. And just a important reminder then that the scriptures as a whole, even the Old Testament, though I know as believers sometimes we tend to work more with the New Testament. Even the Old Testament contains very applicable elements to our day-to-day life. Paul, as he's addressing Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 16 to 17, speaks about Scripture being God-breathed and useful for teaching. And when he was writing that at the time, of course, they didn't have the New Testament as we do today, as that collection of books. They were working with, of course, the Old Testament and the apostles' letters that were coming to them. And so that reminds us of the validity of the things that we find in the Old Testament. And in Daniel chapter 6, of course, we come to that very famous passage on Daniel in the lion's den, his faith as he commits to continuing to pray to the Lord, even though there's this edict that has been set out. And ultimately ends up being thrown into the lion's den, trusting in the Lord through that. Darius, as he comes the next day, though, really gives this word of praise and to the Lord, recognizing who God is. And interestingly, it has some elements to deal with anxiety for us and worry. And the Lord just struck me with this. It says in Daniel chapter 6, verse 26, I have issued an edict that throughout all the dominion of my kingdom, people are to revere and fear the God of Daniel. And then he continues. Here's that element of insight that he gives in worship. For he is, that is Yahweh, is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His authority is forever. He rescues and delivers and performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And what I'm struck by in that passage is a collision of several theological concepts. We have in here the transcendence, if you will, of God in one respect, of the amazingness of who he is and his otherness, if you will. That he's so distinct and different from his creation. He talks about the fact that he's the living God. He endures forever. So he's not like this world that is passing and fading away. His kingdom will not be destroyed. We live in a world in which kingdoms are constantly turning. Leadership is constantly turning. God's kingdom is perfect. It's established. It's continuing forever. His authority is forever. Notice, and it says he rescues and delivers and performs signs and wonders. And we come to the scriptures and we see those amazing things like he did with Israel. Amazing signs. We see how he's moved kingdoms and rulers like Nebuchadnezzar. How he's moved Cyrus to provide for Israel. But I'm struck by the end of verse 27. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And so that boils down the view for a moment to me. Not just his transcendence, but his immanence, then, that he is utterly concerned with us. I remember from theology class, he speaks, he acts, he cares. And so we come from this wide-out view, if you will, of concern about the world as a whole and ruling it, now to an individual person and God's care and compassion and how he has shown him mercy and grace. And I was struck with that verse as I'm reading that about that thought of anxiety and worry. That I don't know if we have these thoughts that we can't bring certain things to God, that he won't possibly deal with them. And yet this passage shows that he does. Not only does he have the power because he is sovereign to act in the situations that we face. And that in and of itself ought to calm our anxieties, that we serve the sovereign God. But also in this passage we see his uttermost care for his prophet Daniel. Jesus talks about this in Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount. He cares for the birds of the air and the grass of the fields. Will he not also care this much more for you? And is seeing what he does here to Daniel. We have again that wide out, now very personal, that he's concerned about Daniel's life. Ultimately it brings him glory in the process. But he's using this man of faith who's trusting in him and he's doing amazing things through that. And again, as I think about anxiety and worry, just a reminder that not only is he sovereign, does he have the power to intervene, the power to act in my life, but also that he deeply cares as well. That, of course, has been shown to the uttermost on the cross. And if he's already provided salvation for me, will he not also be concerned about the day-to-day details of my life and sustaining me with his grace, showing me mercy when I desperately need it, of course, right? Strengthening me to do his will. All the while, though, he calls me to trust him. And really, as we look at his character, there's no flaw within it where we can find any sort of fault or any sort of justification not to trust him in the day-to-day and in the big things of life as well. Hope that gives you a few encouragements, perhaps to see that passage in a different light and how applicable the Old Testament is to us yet today, and even